Hi, my name's Chris Harrison, author of Crooked Tales, and I'm taking part in this year's Author Madness. The organisers have sent me a few questions to answer for this video, so I'll be doing that in just a second. First, so I'll give you a little bit of a brief background on me and where I come from. So I've been writing 3 years now. I'm currently working on my 6th novel. 5th book in the Crooked Tales series is due for release this June. It all started with The Rising, which is the book that I've entered into this year's event. Started off as a book and turned into a 5-book series very quickly. And each book is a love letter to a different subgenre of horror, all of my favorites. And in each book, I tend to, or attempt to, turn tropes on their head and wrong-foot the reader to keep the suspense building and also, unsettle them, scare them, all the good things that horror authors should do. So that's me. I write in Bournemouth, just by the beach, which is lovely. And I'm 50 years old, so late starter to this. Did a little bit of writing earlier in my career on the business side of things. Used to be a columnist in the business world. But my passion's always been fiction and always been horror. So this is me kind of living out a dream, really, in many ways. So on with the questions. First up is, what inspired you to become a writer? I think for me, I've always been interested in writing. I think I've wanted to become a writer for as long as I could read. I was fascinated with storytelling at a young age, particularly the darker side of things. I think that was courtesy of my dad introducing me to the likes of Batman and this sort of classic horror stuff in child-friendly format. So I dabbled in the film industry for a while and got involved in that and the writing side, and didn't really appeal to me in terms of the production process. I very much preferred the writing process and the creating a story, and so it was a natural progression to move on to writing a novel. And I hit an age and my wife said, just go for it, kind of a now or never type of thing. And so I did, and I haven't looked back since. Next up, what are you working on now? So right now I'm working on something that I can't talk about because it's top secret, but I'm looking forward to sharing more information on that soon. I've just put the finishing touches on book 5 in the Crooked Tales series called The Reckoning, which brings that series to a conclusion. And that comes out in June, as I say. So looking forward to sharing that with everyone. There'll be a cover reveal soon and all that good stuff. And hopefully fans of the series enjoy what's coming. What are my plans for the future? So plans for the future are to continue writing. My motto is very much proceed until apprehended. So I'll continue writing. I'd like to do a standalone novel at some point. There's lots of bandwidth within the Crooked Tales universe still, and perhaps there might be a way of incorporating a standalone novel in that universe somehow. I'm also very interested in vampires and writing a vampire novel at some point. Whether that'll be a series or a standalone remains to be seen, but I definitely feel like I've got a story in me in that space, even though it seems pretty crowded. I think I'll never deviate from the young adult space and trying to bridge that gap in horror for younger readers, whilst also making it appealing to older. So I don't think I'll ever depart from that space, but definitely horror, and definitely more to come from me. Interesting fact. So interesting fact about me, which you probably can't tell from photos or videos where I tend to be sitting down, is that I'm 6'9". I used to be a professional basketball player in my youth, so I'm very tall, and I guess that's interesting for anyone who cares. Who knows? Last question. What is your connection to Poe? So my connection to Poe was one of those writers that I found while I was looking for that bridge between sort of Goosebumps and upwards as a kid. And seems a bit of a strange one to find now, actually looking back, but I loved it. I bought a tiny book called The Complete Works of Poe, and I carried that book everywhere around with me at school. So it's the first book that I've ever reread and revisited. You know, when you're young, you just tend to sort of blow through books and consume as much as you can, but that was the one that I kept dipping in and out of and stayed with me. And it holds a special place in my heart as a result. As a consequence of that, I do reference the book in The Rising. One of the characters is a huge Poe fan who scrimps and saves his money to buy a copy secondhand, and so that for me was a way of trying to introduce him to new readers. I think I was always disappointed that Poe wasn't covered within the curriculum when I was at school. So anything I can do to shout about his work and introduce it to younger readers, I'm all over. So it does feature briefly in The Rising, and it also features in a future book as well, which kind of closes the loop on the origins of that Poe book that's bought and where it originally comes from, which I think fans of the series will find quite interesting. So that's me, Chris Harrison. Thanks for following the Author Madness. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to sharing more news soon. Take care.
Hi, horror author Holly Knightley here. Big shout out to Jeannie and Carmine of the 6 Degrees of Edgar Allan Poe. Thank you so much for letting me partake in this year's Author Madness event. I am super psyched to be here with so many amazing authors, many of which I am proud to call my friends. So this event is all about highlighting authors who write in the vein of Poe. So I thought it'd be fun to start off with telling you guys a little bit about my Poe connection. So I discovered Edgar Allan Poe in 7th grade. We had to choose either a poem or a short story to recite in front of the classroom as part of a public speaking initiative. And I chose The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe, and I was instantly hooked. I mean, you do not get better than The Bells. So from there, my love for Poe just continued to grow and grow and grow. I am part of the Poe Book Club hosted by Jeannie and Carmen called Poe Unplugged, where each month we discuss a different Poe work. So if you guys are interested, make sure you check that out. Lots of fun over there. I also wrote a Edgar Allan Poe inspired novel entitled I Have Athena, so that could be maybe something you might want to check out. But for the event, I am actually highlighting my next haunted house mystery thriller entitled Cadbury House. Check out the cover. I just got my proof in the mail. I am so psyched about this book. This book is like such a wild ride, right? So it is a mashup between the haunted house trope and a haunted object trope, and it is pure chaos. So if you like haunted house stories and quirky characters, then this is a book you might want to check out. So I am constantly putting out new books. So if you're interested, you might want to follow me on social media. I'm primarily on Instagram, but I do try to hit all the platforms. Or sign up for my newsletter on my website, hollyknightley.com. All the news breaks first on the newsletter, hence the name. So that might be something you might want to do. I just recently released my short story, Piggy. My next short story, Finding Helen, is up for pre-order this morning, in fact. I finished this year's Christmas novella, Star Child, so the pre-order is up for that. And of course, I mean, we have Cadbury House coming out July 15th. And we have one more novella in the works here at the Knightley House, so super excited to share more with that later. So I just want to say thank you again to Carmen and Jeannie for hosting this event. I'm always excited to discover new authors who are inspired by Poe and watch my TBR grow and grow and grow. Thank you again to all the authors involved. And until next time, stay spooky and happy reading.
Author madness. I suppose all authors are a bit mad to presume to speak out to an unknown audience, to conjure persons that never existed and events that never happened, to share one's innermost fears with strangers. I imagine that most authors consider themselves sane, but that is in itself one of the sure signs of madness. As Edgar Allan Poe wrote in The Telltale Heart, "The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. How then am I mad?" Mad or not, I'm here at Union Cemetery in Placerville, California, where I come for inspiration when I'm writing in my Poe vein. Placerville is a place that I now call home. It dates back to the California Gold Rush, when it was known by the name Hangtown. I've been writing all my life. For many years as a university professor, I wrote various articles and book chapters about the Cold War and the Soviet Union, and I wrote one of the very first textbooks on post-Soviet Russia. But then I had my midlife crisis and I wrote my memoir, which I titled Mid-Century Miscreant. It's perhaps a bit presumptuous for an obscure person like me to write a memoir, but I had a few crises in my life that led, I think, to some insights worthy of being shared with others. I've also written a full-length novel, Sundial in the Shade, that explores the idea of morality and redemption through a character that may or may not be the reincarnation of Benjamin Franklin. Most recently, I've written a handful of short stories in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. I've been drawn to Poe's writing since I was in my 20s. His wordcraft is exquisite, his ability to set a scene, his command of the language, his poetic phrasing, even in his prose. I try to capture that spark, though of course I fall short. Still, I'm especially proud of my short story from last year, Poe's Last Lament, that imagines that Poe did not in fact die in Baltimore in 1849, and instead came out here under an assumed name. In this tale, Poe encounters actual gold rush figures from Hangtown, including wagon builder John Studebaker, publisher Dan Gelwicks, and the Reverend C.C. Pierce, whose grave is here. I also write a blog called Chasing Phantoms that, with all due modesty, I consider one of the most friendly, comfortable, literate, and mind-expanding places on the internet. Many of my blog posts document my travels to ghost towns and other forgotten, out-of-the-way places in California and beyond. But I am not above sharing my beer reviews, my experiences chasing after steam trains, or posting various rants. Every October, I turn over the blog for a full 31 days of something seasonally appropriate, like reviews of 31 different Frankenstein movies or 31 different Halloween cocktails. A couple of Octobers ago, I spent the month posting installments of an original horror tale. What connects all my outlets for writing, I think, is a love of connecting with readers. Writing is a surprisingly intimate act of sharing one's innermost thoughts, fears, feelings, philosophy with readers. I always imagine a reader whenever I write, and I'm writing to that person. The writing process is nothing without that relationship to the reader. It's unconsummated until it's read, if I can be so bold as to put it that way. And that's why I'm so pleased that Carmen and Jeannie and everyone else connected with Poe Unplugged have put this Author Madness event together.
Many thanks to the folks over at 6 Degrees of Poe for inviting me to participate in Author Madness with them this year. My name is Cassandra Windwalker, and I am coming to you today from a closet. The closet seemed like the perfect place because as children, we hide in closets. Sometimes we keep monsters in closets. And as adults, we hide in closets too. We keep all of the skins of our many selves hanging on hooks, waiting for us to don them to cover our own insufficient skins. Closets are places of secrets. And Edgar Allan Poe wrote very well of secrets, not so much the secrets that we keep, but the secrets that we are. And that's something that I admire enormously about him and that I strive to achieve in my own work, is tapping in to those darkest desires and fears and urges that we have within ourselves that, however dark they are, can be used either for good or for ill. And that's something that comes out very much to the fore in my book, Ghost Girls and Rabbits, which is the book that I am promoting during this week of Author Madness. Ghost Girls and Rabbits is a book that was extremely dear to my heart when I was writing it. I was living in Alaska at the time, and it focuses on the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women here on the North American continent. I explore this idea through the viewpoint of two women, one of whom is a mother whose daughter has been missing for 10 years. She's done everything imaginable, but no one's looking for her anymore. So this mother sets out on a very desperate course of action to try to bring her home. She is more than willing to become a monster in order to save her child from the monsters. The perspective of the other character in the book is that of a woman who has been abducted. And in fact, when the book opens, she is trapped in a box, buried alive. And that is kind of what happened to this book, because when I initially wrote it, it took quite a long time to find a publisher who was willing to take a chance on a work like this. I had several publishers who told me that they loved the book, they thought it was beautiful, they thought it was important, and they really hoped somebody else would publish it because it didn't quite fit into their boxes. So I want to shout out to Polymath Press, who took that chance and who published this book because they wanted to publish it, because they believed in it, and because they believed that readers would want to read the book, no matter what box they found that it fit into. One of the other authors that I really admire is Daphne du Maurier, and I mentioned her earlier this week. She's like Edgar Allan Poe, not a very, very current author, but du Maurier's gift lies in building dread and terror in the deftest of language. With just a few words, you find yourself completely alone in a room and yet filled with the utmost horror. And so between these two authors, the one who speaks so well to the darkness that lies within, and the other who speaks so well to the darkness with which we find ourselves surrounded and somehow have to face, I take a lot of inspiration from these folks. So again, Ghost Girls and Rabbits, I would love it if you would pick it up, take a chance on this book. There are a couple of experimental devices throughout the book, which oftentimes readers don't even notice until they get to the very end. They are explained in the author's note at the back of the book. So if you miss them, be sure and check that out and let me know how you think they worked, how you think that they added or detracted from the value of the story itself. As far as what I'm working on right now, I do have something completely different that just came out about a month ago. It's called The Gardener's Wife's Mistress. It's literary fiction that actually has a happy ending, although I admit I can't get entirely away from my dark side, so this book also deals with issues of grief and loss and betrayal. But out of that comes a story of transformative love, unlikely friendships, found family, and the power of a community to accomplish what feels impossible in the beginning. Now, as for what I'm working on right now, I just finished a novel that, again, is completely different. You could call it a mix of historical fiction, fantasy, and science fiction. It is the story of the once and future king returned to the modern world, but it's actually the once and future queen. Turns out those prophecies were written by men for men, so it was really always Morgan who was going to return to save us from our ills. It deals with climate change, it deals with genetic manipulation, so it's got a little bit of everything. If you know anyone who would like to publish something that bizarre, do let me know. And on the subject of letting me know, you can find me across pretty much all of social media. They asked me to mention my handles, so I'll go through those on YouTube and Facebook. You can find me at Cassandra Windwalker Writes. If I don't pop up right away, it might be because you wrote in Cassandra, and my name is Cassandra. I am on Instagram, as well as the new social media platform specifically for writers called Gavagai at Cassandra Windwalker. And I'm also on Twitter at Windwalker Write. You can find my works, of course. Best option is to go through your independent bookstores or your local library. They can definitely get any of my works for you. You can also find me on Goodreads and Storygraph, on barnesandnoble.com, on Amazon. Pretty much wherever you look, I will be haunting you. Thanks so much for letting me interrupt your march with my little bit of madness, and I hope you'll check it out. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Markiewicz, and welcome to Author Madness 2026. I've been asked as part of the author panel to do a short video here for the big event and tell you a little bit about myself and the book that I wrote and some of the future plans that I have going forward. So we'll start with a little biography about me. So I was born in a small town in California called Tehachapi, attended Tehachapi High School, and then went to college at Fresno State University. For the last 28 years, I've been traveling around the world and stationed in various places across the United States as a member of the United States Air Force. Married to my high school sweetheart, Diana, and we've got 3 kids and a little bit obnoxious Labradoodle and a very calm Russian tortoise. But this is more about my writing than it is about me. And when I look back upon some of the younger parts of my life, I've been writing for a really long time. I remember a story I wrote as a young child about a saguaro cactus, and he was a member of the U.S. Army. My grandfather was a member of the Army Air Forces in World War II, building runways for the B-29s in the Assam region of India, and I grew up listening to his stories. And while I probably knew that at some point during my lifetime I would become a member of the armed forces, at that age, I was just figuring out what 3rd, 4th, 5th grade was all about. So I wrote this story, and it kind of demonstrated a love of character development and of being able to tell a tale. It had both artwork and words. So it was the first real time that I had put a lot of things together in story format. And then as I went through school, I really appreciated the English classes a lot more as I got older. And then a teacher I had in high school, Bill Richards, really kind of emphasized what good writing was like. I took that with me to Fresno State, and then I had an opportunity while I was there to take a creative writing class from a professor named Steve Yarborough, who was a writer from the state of Mississippi. And he was at Fresno State as an instructor there in the English department. What I really appreciated about his class was that it was focused on short story writing. So it was being able to develop characters and tell a story in a short period of time or a short number of words. But it had to be a significant event, and you had to be able to collect a greater thought process or a greater storyline and really squeeze it down into something that fit the short story mentality. And I learned through that class about how to tell a tale in a variety of different ways, but be able to engross the reader in that story as well. I didn't need 300 pages if all I needed was 3. Being able to take that into the creation of poetry, where I started writing a lot more poetry at that same time, and had written a few in high school as well, as my wife will attest. And I had decided to publish a book of poetry about the local area where I grew up back in 2003. And that book at the time, which is out of publication now, but it's one that is called Beneath the Mojave Desert Moon, very much reminiscent of the area that I grew up in, north of the Mojave Desert, though there in California. And it takes you as a walk through life and love in a small town, playing baseball, having a girlfriend, seeing some of the history of the town, stories of my grandparents, and so forth. I started to build a love of writing poetry and how to really be able to tell a story in yet a different way. As I was stationed in Italy in 2002, I had the opportunity to be forward deployed to the Balkan areas, which used to be Yugoslavia and had broken up into a variety of smaller republics. And during that time, I was able to be forward deployed to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo primarily, as well as a couple other smaller locations. during that time, the Operation Allied Force, had finished in the late 90s. And as part of a NATO contingent, I was able to go around and see a lot of the war zone, the war-torn region that had just suffered so greatly under Slobodan Milosevic's army from Serbia. While I was able to travel around that region, I was able to take some photographs. And then in the evenings, I would write a lot about what I saw. I would sometimes journal even throughout the day. But as I went back to the room and I was able to write some poetry about the emotions, about the scenes, the landscapes, the people, the buildings, the war-torn region, some of the history as well, especially in Sarajevo, there in Bosnia. It was cathartic, but it was also memorializing a very important piece of my time in the military at that point, which had only been 4 to 4.5 years at that point. Now that sat in my drawer and then also sat on my shared drive on the computer for a number of years. And it was during my assignment to Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, just a couple of years ago, where a neighbor who had been a Marine and then a sportsman and a hunter and a journalist and a longtime writer for the state newspaper in South Carolina simply asked me if I'd written anything, and I went through the story, and he basically asked me, what am I waiting on to get it published? And so that was the prompt I really needed, I think, in order to get this book from the notes, from the photo cards, and from the shared drive out into the world in a published format. And so the book is called Sarajevo Roses, Poetry from a War Zone. And as you can see here on the cover, that is a design of a Sarajevo rose, and a very historical piece. The Sarajevo rose is a memorialized spot in the pavement or on a sidewalk in Sarajevo where a munition hit the ground and detonated, and you see the main pockmark and then the fragmentation. And the people there in Sarajevo would fill those pockmarks with resin, different colors, pinks and reds and purples and so forth. And there's about 200 of them throughout the city of Sarajevo. But what makes those significant is that at least 3 people died in that area where they have placed those Sarajevo roses. So that story and seeing those in the sidewalk and in the road were very impactful. And out of all of my time in all those places, I decided that needed to be the cover of the book, and that had to be the hallmark of that journey through the Balkans. So I hope at some point you'll find this book interesting, military history and poetry and associated photographs, and learn about a place of the world that, even though we're still there right now here in 2026, it's still not talked about on the news very often. And it's kind of a forgotten area of the world when you're talking about military deployments and what we're doing, but still very important what we're doing over there as part of KFOR especially. That is my current work. What am I doing outside of that? Well, I'm starting my first real science fiction novel. And this is a story that, as people have asked me about it at book fairs, what is your book about? I tell them it's a mixture between Star Trek and Indiana Jones. And if that all by itself just entices you, well, that's fantastic. And I'd love to hear about it. But I'm about 100 pages or so through it at the moment, and still working to finish that up. Hopefully we'll have that done here by the end of the year. But as I'm looking into being able to spend time writing, I have to be understanding of the fact that's only one part of my life. I'm also a voice actor and an audiobook narrator. And in fact, one of the other authors that you will hear from during Author Madness 2026, Holly Knightley, I've been able to narrate 3 of her suspense books, and they are incredible. So I hope not only will you buy her books and read them, but listen to the audiobooks as well, because I think you'll get a different flavor in each, from the written version to the audio version, and I have no doubt in my mind you will enjoy them both. Now, as you look at the screen behind me and this little backdrop that I have, this is Westminster Hall, the graveyard out in front of Westminster Hall there in Baltimore, Maryland, and you can see the tomb of Edgar Allan Poe. So one of the things about this Author Madness 2026 is also a Poe connection. So what is our connection to Edgar Allan Poe? Well, for me, it's multifold. One, I've been a Poe fan for the vast majority of my life, having read The Cask of Amontillado in probably 6th or 7th grade, and having it still be my favorite Poe story of all time. But I have taken my love of Edgar Allan Poe's works, and I have taken that to create adapted scripts, then hiring voice actors and putting sound effects behind it, and then hiring a musician to do musical scoring to essentially create full cast audio dramas of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories. Now, I have also been blessed to be able to submit those to the International Edgar Allan Poe Festival and Awards over the last few years, and have now been grateful to receive 2 nominations for the Saturday Visitor Award there at the International Edgar Allan Poe Festival held up in Baltimore. And I hope that this continues for many years to come. I have many more audio dramas to produce. In fact, Mask of the Red Death, which was probably the most complicated story that I have put together. And the voice actors were tremendous. The music has just been completed and it's in post-production right now. Will come out on May 16th of 2026. And it's available for pre-order now on our website, markiewitzAudioworks.com. And you can go to our digital store and see the pre-order link on there as well. But my Poe connection has definitely run fairly deep over the last few years. And if you take that connection and you put it into Sarajevo Roses, there's a poem in here called House of Usher. And as I traveled the war zone, you absolutely see places that could be very reminiscent of the macabre style and the Gothic demeanor that Poe wrote a lot of his stories in. As well as a poem that I wrote in here that was, I would say, probably one of the most interesting times that I spent, where it was right next to a former mass grave. The poem itself is called Mass Grave Beneath the Snow, and it details the possibility of seeing a man and his son who didn't know that they had been buried in that mass grave, and what they may have thought while I stood there. Those kind of have a very Poe-esque flavor to them. So I think you will see, my appreciation for the way Edgar Allan Poe's poetry and his short storytelling were, and what that meant to me, reflected in some of the poems that I wrote here in Sarajevo Roses. So that's a lot about me and my book and my connection with Edgar Allan Poe. I certainly hope you enjoy hearing from the other authors and are enjoying our social media posts here in Author Madness 2026. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can follow me on Facebook at Jason Markiewicz. You can also find Markiewicz Audio Works on Facebook, YouTube channel for Jason Markiewicz, and Markiewicz Audio Works Presents. But you can always find everything you need from our website at www.markiewitzAudioworks.com. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a fantastic 2026.
Hi everybody, I am Vicki Parhampton and I am so excited to be participating in Author Madness this year. A little bit about me. I am a trained epidemiologist. I have a podcast called Horror, Humor, Hunger about all things horror. Fun fact, I have a giant German Shepherd poodle mix named Tater Tot who loves to accompany me on long walks while I think about my books. I write mainly horror, but since there are so many subgenres of horror, I can break it down even more. I write historical. I write a tiny bit of cosmic. I write some thriller, some action and adventure thrown in there. I write medical horror. I write body horror. I write possession horror. I write supernatural horror, gothic. I try to explore lots of different subgenres of horror in my work because I don't like to read the same thing all the time, so I don't like to write the same thing all the time either. I became a writer because, well, I was stuck in a job that I absolutely hated. I would be at my computer, at my desk, wishing I could just escape. And so I started writing myself out of that office by writing horror novels and emails to myself on lunch breaks. Anytime I wasn't actively working, I was writing. And eventually, I started writing novels. I have 4 of them, and I'll take you through them right now. My first one was called A Cold Night for Alligators. It's about a rogue epidemiologist who chases a mysterious outbreak to a haunted, abandoned theme park. It was based on my time as an epidemiologist at the CDC, working on the national guidelines for the clinical management of botulism. And that one is more of a thriller, a little bit of action adventure, and of course the supernatural aspect at the haunted theme park, which is fictional, but I sincerely wish was real. After that, I wrote Much Too Vulgar, which is about a disturbed pre-med student who will do anything she can to get into med school, even if that means eliminating her competition. This one is more of a psychological thriller because it's something that could really happen. Next came The Rotting Room, which is my gothic supernatural possession book, and it's about a young nun named Sister Raffaella who comes to a new convent only to discover that the sisters there have some very sinister secrets and some deeply disturbing burial practices. This one is fun because it is based on a real history. There were such places as rotting rooms. They were called putridariums, and nuns like the Poor Clares in 17th century Ischia, Italy, would take their dead sisters there and let them rot. They would sit over these holes in these stone benches, their liquids would drain, and the body would slowly mummify. The nuns would go pray over these bodies and sometimes fall victim to whatever made those dead sisters sick in the first place. And that one, like I said, is more gothic, it's supernatural, it's got possession, and it's historical. And then my most recent novel is called A Veritable Household Pet, and it's about a girl named Darla Gregory who receives a transorbital lobotomy at the age of 11. And we follow her life in the aftermath of the surgery, as well as the life of her older sister, Ellie, who acts as her caretaker and the reluctant scribe for her story. And this one is written kind of in a diary style, and it has dual simultaneous POVs. We're hearing Darla's story, but then we also get interjections from Ellie, kind of describing her version of events, injecting her perspective and what she thinks really happened. As for future plans, my 5th novel will be coming out in late July. It's called Ripped Up the Middle in Two, and it's kind of a cryptid creature feature motherhood horror about a postpartum mom who thinks that there's an evil fairy living in the woods who wants to come steal her baby. You can find me at my website, ViggyHampton.com, on Instagram and TikTok at ViggyParhampton, and of course you can find my podcast, Horror, Humor, Hunger, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi folks, Matt Mercier here. Very happy to be participating in Author Madness this week. A little bit about myself. I'm a writer and storyteller living in the Hudson Valley. Writer and storyteller may sound similar, the same, but to me they're very different. As a writer, I sit alone in my room for 3 or 4 hours a day and work on a novel, which will hopefully someday get published. As a storyteller, I tell stories live in front of an audience in the oral tradition, right? I started doing this back in 2008 with a group called The Moth. You may have heard of them. They're based out of New York. So you get up in front of an audience, you tell a 5-10 minute story, you make people laugh, cry, shock them maybe a little bit, tell jokes. But it's a wonderful thing. I discovered that I had a talent for performative storytelling. I was able to go out and work on material and bring audiences from point A to point B and tell them a story. And it gave me an enormous amount of confidence, which I then took back to my writing desk. Writing, of course, is very lonely. So the storytelling gave me the juice to go back and work on my novels in silence. I have to work on my novels in silence. So writer and storyteller, that's primarily what I am. I've tried to do a number of other jobs, but I've always failed. And so thankfully, this is now my job. This is what I do. I think I wrote my first novel. This is going to sound very pretentious, but I wrote my first novel in 5th grade in Mrs. DeBartolo's class. It was a novel about animals taking over the world. So do with that what you will. But my Poe connection is directly related to the first novel that I published. Here it is, Poe and I, out from Crystal Lake Publishing. This novel it's my debut. It is directly related to, or loosely based on, my experiences as the caretaker for the last home of Edgar Allan Poe, which is right there on the cover. You can see that's Poe Cottage. It's in the Bronx. And for 4 years, I lived in the basement. Came out of my basement, my hobbit hole, every Saturday from 10 to 4 and Sundays from 1 to 5 to give guided tours of the cottage. Poe, of course, some of you may know that he this is where he brought Virginia when she contracted tuberculosis. This is where he brought her to the Bronx, which was the country at the time. He thought it would clear her tubercular lungs, but unfortunately it did not. She died of tuberculosis at the age of 25. He wrote Annabel Lee, The Bells, Cask of Amontillado, Hop Frog. So many classics were written in this cottage. And I got to tell people about it every weekend for 4 years. It was a wonderful job. It was the weirdest job I ever had. I called it the gated community of one. There was a locked gate surrounding the property. I had my own little city park, but it was a wonderful experience, and it gave me so many wonderful experiences that I was able to write a whole book about it. Again, loosely based on my experiences, not at all autobiographical. My narrator is a bit more deranged and unreliable in the great Poe tradition. I'm very pleased to announce that this book was awarded a Saturday Visitor Award, which awards books that use Poe as inspiration. So thank you very much to the Edgar Allan Poe Society for acknowledging it. It was, this is a small press book, so it doesn't get as much attention as the Big Five. So I was very pleased to have it recognized by Poe people. Yeah, that's pretty much it. At the moment, I am working on a new novel. It's about 100,000 words at the moment, so hopefully my publisher will go for it. I am continuing to tell stories, continuing to write stories on the page and on the stage. That was an unintentional rhyme. I did not mean that. You can find me out there on Instagram as where I'm most active at matthew.mercier.poem. Facebook, Threads. I'm all over the place. So nice to meet everyone. I'm looking forward to the rest of the week. Thanks very much.
Hi all, I'm Brianna Licciardi. I'm a creative writer. Dabble in all the genres, but probably best known for poetry. A little about me. I've moved and lived in a bunch of places, so whenever someone asks where am I from, I never know how to answer that question. Currently live in Tennessee, teach at a university here. But what led me here was actually an MFA program for creative writing out of Emerson College in Boston. And my focus was on poetry, and I graduated with a poetry collection that was like my thesis, and a couple years later ended up publishing it. So that was my very first book publication, was a chapbook collection of poetry called Skin Splitting. And as you could tell from the name, I kind of was already dabbling in the dark arts, as you will. That's what Edgar Allan Poe and I have in common, which isn't as common in the poetry world. So I think, again, that's another reason I was drawn to him, because he was able to stay relevant and mainstream in writing more darker content with poetry. And more recently, I've published a book of poetry that's full length called Fish Love. The title came from an interview I saw with this rabbi who talked about people abusing the concept of love. He says what we call love is often just what he calls fish love, which is that like we devour what we love in people, like we consume it, want it for ourselves, and kind of kill it along the way, rather than asking selflessly, like, I love this person. I want to make sure that they stay full and whole and I can provide for them. And that really stuck with me and kind of guided this collection, which touches on darker themes, some personal stuff, some random absurd stuff, that still speaks to like all these different darker truths when it comes to familial love, romantic love, friendship love. So yeah, so that's what I've been promoting this week is from my collection Fish Love. How long have I been a writer? Since I was a baby. I remember getting in trouble in first grade because I wrote my very first book, a bunch of scrap papers in an attempt to staple them together. I accidentally stapled them to our dining room table. Um, so that's kind of burned in my brain. But yes, I've been a writer since I can remember. I loved it from a very young age. Obviously, I love the horror genre. Stephen King was my first kind of entry into that, I would say. But since then, I've branched out, and I also love the horror genre, period, movies, TV show. Um, Interesting fact about me that readers would enjoy knowing. Um, I feel like the people who find me and who I find kinship in are the weirdos, the ones who are awkward, don't fit in, but aren't ashamed for not fitting in. I feel like I'm an eclectic sort. I've kind of not really found a specific niche of writing that gets me, and I've been on the outside and kind of found my calling in being an outsider. So if you are a fellow outsider, I am your people. Let's bond over all of our awkward encounters, attempting to be social or whatever it was. Um, what inspired me to become a writer, I would say support from people that who didn't really know me. So teachers along the way, um, mentors who saw my work and took the time to sit me aside and say, "You're actually really good at this. You should take the time to pursue it." So yeah, teachers along the way. Even if we only have you in one class, you never know the impact that you can have on somebody in the early stages of writing. Um, so I am a teacher now today, full circle, and teaching creative writing. Um, I try to remember that it's not about what I think your work should be. It's about you getting to experiment and explore and feel safe and brave and right to fail, not right to please. So I hope to kind of offer that inspiration moving forward to others in the future. I already discussed my current books and my connection to Poe. I remember reading um, his short stories in school, and of course his famous poems. And everyone else would kind of say like he's creepy, and I was the only one that was like, I've read it 3 times. So I think that was my first inkling that I was a little different, and I was drawn to what was different. And plans in the future, I'm actually working on a hybrid collection of flash fiction and poetry that is in like the horror genre. So I'm really excited about it. It's very hard to find a place for it because it's not quite fitting any of the manuscript calls that I'm seeing. But I think it's different, and I'm always excited to do something different. And I've been working on writing fiction, which is such a different beast in and of itself. So yes, that's something exciting in my future. And that's it. I'm supposed to mention my socials. So I am on Instagram at Brianna with a Y .poet. So you can find me there. And I also have a website where you can find all of my individual publications if you would like, or if you would like to purchase my books. It's BriannaLicciardi.com. So BriannaLicciardi.com. I know that's a mouthful. But hopefully I haven't bored you and you're still listening. So thank you for this opportunity, and hope to talk to you soon.
What's good, everybody? I am Nicholas J. Ripley, horror and grimdark author. I am also frontman of the band Futilitarian Librarians, and I do all my own digital art. I have been writing since age 11 technically, but I took it seriously about age 19. And what became my first book was actually the same book that I started writing at age 19. It took about like 10 years for me to finally publish that. But let's see. Interesting fact about me. Uh, I am a plantser. I'm not a plotter or a pantser. I'm somewhere in between. I know the general direction that a story is going typically, but I give it air to breathe. Like, I always have a very flexible outline. I don't really write solid outlines simply because I know that the writing process is very unpredictable, and sometimes the characters will reveal something to me that I just didn't even think was possible. A lot of times, my characters, I have an idea about them going into the project, but once I actually get into the weeds, so to speak, they become their own, living, breathing character. And that's very much so why, like, I'm very open-ended with where my stories are headed and everything. So that's typically why I'm a planter, because if I try to plot it out way too much, that's just not going to work out for me. Um, what inspired me to become a writer? This goes back a long ways, because when I was very, very young, what I actually wanted to be was a film director, because I thought that being a director inherently meant that you wrote the movie. Um, Little Nicky didn't know that that was necessarily not the standard. So once found out that, being a writer was being a writer, that's more or less what I wanted to be from day one. And I've been writing for as long as I can remember, writing and drawing my own characters. That's just been the status quo. My current books. So my first releases were A Winter for Doves Parts 1 and 2. This is part of a sci-fi grimdark series that I have. Uh, Probably will have some more installments coming out this year with A Hunt for Wolves Parts 1 and 2. But my current book, and the one that we're here to talk about today because it's the most Poe inspired, is Aberration. This one deals with a character grappling with their sanity and the possible loss of it, and seeing this dark figure around that's on the cover. And it's very, very trippy, very artsy. I always like to think of this one as kind of like my David Lynch film out of my books. So yeah, Aberration. That is the most relevant to Poe. Um, my future plans, well, like I said earlier, I'm planning on releasing A Hunt for Wolves Parts 1 and 2 in the very near future. Hopefully, the first part by the end of this year. And I'm currently working on a splatterpunk novel named Stray, about a Las Vegas stripper who gets kidnapped and seeks revenge on her kidnappers. So, and that's all I'll say about that one, because it's still very much so in the early stages. Uh, my links for social media: I'm Nick J Ripley Official on Insta. I am Ripley J Nick on X, and I'm forgetting TikTok at the moment, but I'm pretty sure that you can find me pretty easily on there too. But yeah, Nicholas J Ripley signing off. Thank you.
Hello, Renee Cronley here. I just want to thank the creators of the 6 Degrees of Poe for inviting me to participate in this Authors March Madness. I think it's a pretty cool concept. So a little bit about myself. I've been a writer for quite a while. I would say since before I could officially write. I was narrating stories in my head and acting them out through play and with my dolls, and by the time I was about in grade 4, I'd say I was able to flesh them out a bit better and, you know, put paper to pen and do illustrations. Not very great, but, and just start putting stories together. And that progressed all throughout middle school and junior high, and then in high school. I'd say I was writing quite a bit, and my teachers were very supportive, and they knew quite a bit. They would be actively looking for like literary festivals and contests and things like that and bringing it to my attention. So I would say I was pretty active as a writer, and then just in the arts and expressing it and putting myself out there. That did slow down once I went to university and college. Certainly when I went to nursing school. By that, and when I was actively nursing as well, I would say that during that time was the most stagnant I had ever been with my writing. And that was simply having to do with time and lack of creative energy, mostly from operating in survival mode, and just the regular demands of life and having children. But I did dive back into it. Well, we had some local contests with our library, and I won a couple of them, and that helped, you know, get me back into it and push me forward. And then there was a call from Love Letters to Poe, and I had always loved Poe from seeing a picture book with the raven on it, and you know, this there was another picture with Annabelle Lee in The Kingdom by the Sea, and that always, those pictures along with the words always captivated me. So one of my favorite short stories by Poe was The Mask of the Red Death, and in my postpartum sort of delirium haze, it was 2 days after I had my youngest, I wrote this short story. I think it was The Thief of Eternal Delights. And it got published in the first anthology of Love Letters to Poe, and I ended up getting published in all 3 of them. And my last short story, there's Home is Where the Heart is actually the one that I'm advertising for this week of Author March Madness. A little bit about my writing process is that it is sporadic, but I try to keep it consistent. It's hard with the demands of life, and then of course with children and any other sort of demands of the day. Writing is a very interesting process because, or I guess this can extend to any sort of artistry or creativity that demands a certain depth. When you are operating on survival mode, or survival mode is just a pretty good way to put it, you can't dig in and reach any real depth, which is where the real sort of spark and all the good stuff really comes from. So it's hard to fight to make time for that, but it's also important to do, because I find that creative people need that purge, that outlet. It's like it stays in you, and it needs to be vented, and it always comes out so beautifully and in a way that touches other people when you're sharing it. And I find that such a beautiful, and even it's a gift, really. The process itself can be mine is quite chaotic anyways. Comes out and, you know, these just stacks of notes and random lines and random paragraphs and random verses, and some of them fit together and then some of them don't. Some of them could be put possibly with another poem or short story or part of a novel, and the others I'll keep it and then not do anything with it because it doesn't work, or when something finally starts working, half of the stuff that I had written notes on don't even have anything to do with anything. It doesn't work for it, but I still needed to keep it. It's a very, very strange, I want to say process. I guess it is, but I would say it's quite frustrating at times. But it's been long enough that I have discovered this is clearly my process. So it is what it is. My future plans with regards to writing is finishing my healthcare burnout, compassion fatigue, if you want to call it. It's just sort of a mixture of a whole bunch of different themes that are plaguing healthcare workers and ultimately how it impacts our system and care. Just another way to shed light on the issues that are going on right now from, a frontline perspective, poetically. And that is something I am slowly but surely plugging away at. It gets difficult because unlike some other poems that I write, I can just sort of fly through it, and something just works lyrically and I can put it together and it still sounds pretty. But ultimately with this, in each poem, I'm trying to hammer a theme into it and get a point across. So I find each poem has extra pressure on it, and I think that is what is taking up a good majority of the time. But I'm plugging along. It'll happen. And really, that's all I got for the moment. You can find me at Renee Cronley on Instagram and on Facebook, and www.reneecronley.com. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Josh White. I'm a horror author. A little bit about me. I grew up in Brick, New Jersey, a town near much more famous towns like Point Pleasant or Seaside Heights, but did grow up on the Jersey Shore. And after high school, I went to Penn State, where I majored in journalism. I now live in San Diego with my wife and my 2 boys. I have always loved horror. I saw my first horror movie, which was Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, when I was only 5 years old, which my mom was not too happy about. I began reading Goosebumps when I was 6, so that was a gateway, like a lot of people, I think. And it just kicked off this lifelong love of horror literature. I've read more horror books than I can count, and have nearly logged over 1,000 horror movies on Letterboxd. I think it's the most flexible genre, and it's easily my favorite. Growing up, I always wanted to be a writer. I started writing my first short stories when I was really young, and I even wrote a play when I was around 11 years old. It's pretty hard to go back and read now, but yeah, I've always been writing in some capacity. I didn't write much beyond high school for a long time. After I went through a divorce when I was in my early 20s, I started to write again as a way to get some feelings out, but unfortunately my laptop got stolen, and then it totally derailed everything. It wasn't until a few years later, when I was 28, that I started to get that itch again. I just finished a reread of my favorite book, which was, still is, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And I started to have this idea that combined recurring nightmares that I was having with a haunted house and my love of unreliable narrators. But I didn't really start writing until I watched the god-awful movie, The Bye-Bye Man. And basically it was like this come to Jesus moment for me, where I realized that if somebody can make something that was that bad and tons of people would willingly consume it, then I had no excuse but to write and see what can happen. I have written 3 books to date. My first book I have a very love-hate relationship with. It's called Phantasmagoria. I like the idea a lot. 4 sufferers of various sleeping disorders go to an isolated retreat in the mountains, and only the house may or may not be haunted, and the POV shifts from character to character, kind of like Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, which is another one of my favorite books. Problematically, this was extremely ambitious for someone who never published something before, and who honestly hadn't written in years, and I learned a lot from it. Most importantly, I learned that I couldn't edit it myself. And, while it does have good parts, but it is long, it's messy, and it's very convoluted at times. There's a reason that I don't really push this one. And, I talk all about my other books and stuff. At some point, I'm going to come back and fix it and find someone to properly edit it. And at that point, I'm going to talk about it much more because I do think that there's something there. But right now, it feels almost like it's still in a rough draft form when I go back and read it. My second book, by contrast, I absolutely love. It's called Have You Heard Her Call? And it's sort of a feminist take on The King in Yellow. It tells the story of a mysterious book that seems to drive the women who read it insane. But each one of them react to it a bit differently and react to the presence of this cosmic figure called the woman, very differently. It's told through interconnected novellas. It combines all sorts of horror like tropes and subgenres, from cosmic to religious, possession, even slasher tropes, all into one book. It's the first thing I published that was really well liked outside of just me. And honestly, also the first thing that I published that my wife really liked, because she did not like my first book. So I'm really proud of this one. I think it's really good, and it's one that I'll talk about forever. My third book and most recent publish, which comes out this month, is We Uncertain Step. It is a collection of 5 standalone short stories. The title is taken from the really amazing Emily Dickinson poem, which is We Grow Accustomed to the Dark. And that's one of the lines that's in there. I'm proud of this collection too, and my short story Lee Moralia is maybe my favorite thing that I've written, but I do really like this one, and I think it's really good, and I'm excited for people to read it. All of my books are available on Amazon, and happy for you to check any of them out. So Edgar Allan Poe was incredible. Like most horror authors, I'd imagine, he has influenced me in all sorts of ways that I'm probably not even totally conscious of. Most immediately, however, is my short story in this collection that's coming out this month, and the short story is called Every Feather is Black by Moonlight. The story itself is about a Texas military veteran named Pete, whose wife becomes terrified of the recent immigration raids. When this fear is heightened by a bad omen from her past, Pete brushes those warnings aside, but soon he begins to have his own experiences, ones that he can't really explain, as something comes to him from the desert. The telltale horror was definitely in the DNA of this story, and it's something that I thought about a lot as I wrote. Although, the unnamed narrator in Poe's work is, I would say, he becomes a bit more aware of the guilt, while Pete does not necessarily come to the same real revelation. I'm already working on my next book. It's tentatively called Hold Me Till I Sizzle. I'm not totally sure what the length is yet, but I have it outlined, and I'm already starting to work on it. Without giving too much away, it's sort of my attempt at a campy horror romance, and it pairs 2 magnetic strangers, a mysterious power they possess while in the presence of one another, and a shadowy group that may be trying to exploit that power. So for inspiration, I am firmly in film territory right now. There isn't a lot that I've read that is the right tone for what I'm trying to do, but I'm still looking. So inspiration right now looks like Phantom of the Paradise, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, Streets of Fire, and Lair of the White Worm. But at any rate, my goal is to have this ready by Valentine's Day 2027, so really excited for that. Hey, I really appreciate being interviewed for this event. I'm looking forward to all the interactions with all the other horror authors, and big shout out to Edgar Allan Poe, who I guess we owe this honor to. So thanks so much.
Hi, this is A.A. Rubin. I'm excited to be participating in Author Madness 2026 from the 6 Degrees of Edgar Allan Poe. If you don't know me, I'm a writer who writes across genres and mediums. I've written everything from formal poetry to comic books, literary fiction to science fiction and fantasy, and almost everything in between. I first discovered Edgar Allan Poe in a Scholastic Book Fair flyer, one of these, sort of like this one that my son recently brought home from his school. It's where I discovered a number of my favorite authors, including J.R.R. Tolkien and Edgar Allan Poe. This is the very first Poe book I ever read, Famous Tales of Mystery and Horror, in the old Watermill Classics edition. You can see how beat up this is. The Tolkien was also the same edition from the book fair. I believe I bought both of those sometime in 6th grade. So I've been reading Poe for a long time, and he's been a big influence on my writing. You'll hear a lot this week from a lot of authors who are writing Gothic horror or other branches of horror, and Edgar Allan Poe is an author who's these days primarily associated with Gothic and with horror. And I write a lot of that too. I had a Poe-inspired short story, The Vibrations Louder, in Pseudopod magazine last year, which was a modern retelling of The Telltale Heart, and I encourage you to check that out. So I do write in that genre, and Poe is also a huge influence on my poetry, because I am a formal poet. I write a lot of metered and rhymed poetry, and Poe is known for that as well. But I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach to this, because I am a writer who writes across genres and mediums, and Poe was as well. Poe wrote, in addition to his Gothic horror, in addition to his poetry, for which most people know him, Poe invented the detective stories. Anything that's a mystery, really, especially a Sherlock Holmes style mystery, goes back to Dupin and the Murders in the Rue Morgue. He wrote science fiction. He even wrote some satire, some humorous satire, short stories as well, and a bunch of nonfiction too, a bunch of criticism. I remember using his essay on short stories, on writing short stories and what makes a good short story in my teaching career as well. And as a writer who was so successful writing across genres and across different areas, and inventing new genres to write the stories that were in his head, to write what was in his imagination. Poe's imagination couldn't be confined to just one genre. It couldn't be, he wouldn't be pigeonholed into writing a certain type of story. And I feel like these days, so many of us are trying to brand ourselves and trying to write in one genre, in one medium only. And it's a shame, because, another great poet, Walt Whitman, said, I contain multitudes, and there are multitudes inside of all of us, especially inside of creative people. And for Poe to provide that model of the great writer who isn't restricted by any genres that he's known for, or even any genres that exist at the time, for him to write the stories that he wanted to write, whether they were Gothic, whether they were science fiction, whether they were funny, whether it was poetry. That's really inspiring to me, and one of the things that I admire most about Edgar Allan Poe. So again, I've had a lot of fun in Author Madness. I've met a few of the other authors who I didn't know before, and I had a fun time following along with the authors with whom I already had a relationship. And thank you to Carmen and Jeannie for putting this all together. If you'd like to find out more about my work, again, I'm A.A. Rubin. I can be found across social media as The Surreal Ari, all one word, The Surreal Ari. There's so many new platforms these days. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads, Instagram, Facebook. But whatever platform you're on, if I'm on that platform, it will be as The Surreal Ari, at The Surreal Ari. You can also check out my website, www.aarubin.com. So again, happy March Madness, happy Author Madness, and celebrate Edgar Allan Poe and the 6 Degrees of Edgar Allan Poe, and have a great day.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying Author Madness. It's so great to be a part of this, and thanks to Carmen and Jeannie at 6 Degrees of Poe podcast for putting together this super cool event for all of us Poe authors. I'm Rachel M. Martins. I am an author. I'm the author of the Poe Gothic Thriller series, among other things, but I'm most well known for this, and this is my Poe-themed work. Poe Nevermore is the first book in the series, and at the time this video airs, book 5 will have just come out yesterday on Friday the 13th. It's going to be a 6-book series, so it's pretty exciting that book 5 is out now, and there's just one more to go. I guess since I'm already talking about my books, I'll stay with that for now. The premise of the series is that the main character is a direct descendant of Edgar Allan Poe, and there is a family curse that takes the form of his stories. So she has to recognize them unfolding in time to prevent them. Each book in the series is inspired by at least one of Edgar's horror stories, sometimes more than one. And yeah, it's been a really fun project, a lot of fun, and also sometimes challenging, very, yeah, it's a cool project, and I've had the honor of connecting with a lot of readers over it. I attend a lot of horror conventions, and I was at Poe Fest International the last 2 years. That's actually where I met 6 Degrees of Poe. And yeah, it's brought me a lot of places, and it's a really cool thing. And I hope you'll check out the books. A little bit more about myself. Writing is just something that I've kind of always done, even since I was a little kid. Horror writing is also something that I've done since I was a little kid, much to my parents' disappointment and concern, I will say. But I can write other things, but horror is just my home. It's what I'm good at, and there's a certain power to horror, isn't there? That sense of facing your fears and conquering them, and I love that. I enjoy writing other things too, but nothing feels quite the same as writing a good horror scene. Which is maybe why I enjoy working with my Poe series so much. There's some pretty dark stuff going on in there, and it feels good to fight those things alongside my characters and to conquer them. And I hope that my readers get the same satisfaction from reading that I get from writing it. Let's see, what else? What inspired writing process? Okay, so let's talk about writing process. Every writer has their own writing process, and I'll let you in on a secret. It changes from book to book. At least it does for me. My most recent book, the 5th in the Poe series, Poe Living Tomb, only wanted to be written in the middle of the freaking night. My last couple books I could write any time of day, and that was great. And in the past, I have written a lot at night, and I enjoy writing at night, but it's not an exclusive thing, Not this book. This book only wanted to be written in the middle of the freaking night. I could not write this book while there was sunshine out to save my life. I also sometimes work with an outline. With Living Tomb, I had a pretty elaborate outline, and a lot of it got scrapped. because the way I write is I try and bring the characters as much to life as I can, and once the characters are alive, I kind of let them run the show. And I consider my best work and my most enjoyable writing to be what happens when the characters run away with the story, and I'm just there transcribing it. Um, it's a lot of fun because I get to, be surprised by things the same way that a reader is surprised. Um, Sometimes makes it hard to plan though. For Living Tomb, I thought I was aiming for an 85,000 word novel, which is typical for a thriller. No, it's 105,000 words. It ended up being a little thicker. It ended up being about the thickness of my first book, which is fine. It's good. It's how the story was meant to be, which is always what I'm going for. I, all author madness. All authors are at least a little bit schizophrenic, some of us more than others. And, I know my characters aren't real, but, they're real to me. And I try and tell their story with integrity and really let them drive things. And that certainly happened with this book. I'm pleased to say that I was surprised by a lot of things that happened in this book, and I hope my readers are surprised by it too. Future plans, of course, book 6, and I also have some other projects that I'm working on right now. I have a completely unrelated book called Metalhead that is a YA paranormal romance thriller. Good girl falls in love with bad boy guitarist, and that book needs a sequel. And I'm also working on a totally new project set in my home state of Wisconsin that I'm calling Northwoods Horror. Yeah, so a lot of fun stuff on the horizon. I hope you're enjoying Author Madness, and I hope you pick up the Poe series somewhere and maybe hunt me down online. My website is www.rachelmmartinsauthor.com. That's where you can find information about all my books and all the conventions that I go to, so you can stalk me there and get a signed book. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is at Rachel M. Martins. Nice to meet you, and have a mad day.
What's up? This is horror author R. Jacob Honeybrook, and I am here today to tell you a little bit about myself and my writing. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So a little bit about me. I have been writing fiction since about 2018, so 8 years now. Sounds crazy to say, but guess that's the truth. Some of my favorite genres, man, I read a lot of classical literature and nonfiction history, which probably sounds really boring to any fans of reading horror, but I don't know, I've always had an interest in history. And I like reading the classics just because, I don't know, I guess there's a reason these books have been around and revered for so long. Like my favorite book's The Count of Monte Cristo, so a little bit about what I like to read. And of course, horror. I gotta say that. But I mainly read horror that my friends write, like Holly Knightley, Viggy Parhampton. I'm sure you'll hear from them if you haven't already. Two fantastic horror writers, so I always enjoy reading their stuff. The problem is they write too fast, and I read too slow. So I read one of their books, and they've already put out 3 more. I'm like, God, slow it down a little bit, please. Oh, let's see. How about an interesting fact about me that you guys might not know? I always throw this one out there. I was a part of my college's boxing team, And I think that's interesting just because I don't think a lot of writers have done that, like competed in fighting, I guess you could say. But man, that taught me a lot that I use in writing, just about discipline and trying to work on something every day and seeing the progress. And it kind of teaches you courage. If I can step into a ring against a dude that wants to rip my head off, then hey, I can write a book and publish it. Like, we got this. So it taught me a lot of good stuff. It wasn't just all about throwing hands. And my writing process, oof. Lately, I've been having ideas come from dreams, as cliche as that sounds. But like Thaddeus Green's Spooktacular House of Horrors, which I am promoting during this Author Madness event, that the first half of that all came to me in a dream. Unfortunately, in the second part of the dream, it didn't end with this crazy carnival of madness and whatnot. It ended with me like picking up trash around the park. I didn't think that made for a good book, so I had to come up with where that whole thing was going on my own, because my dream didn't really help me in that department. But once I get an idea, I usually write out like a very basic, bare outline, and then from there, I just dive right into it. It's always the question of, are you, what is it, a pantser or a planner? I'm a hardcore pantser. But what's weird is if I get halfway through and I'm not sure where the story should go, then I'll start to do a detailed outline. But I normally just go in with like basic plot points, kind of like what's going to happen in Act 1, basics of what's going to happen in Act 2, and then how the whole thing is going to wrap up. Sometimes I don't even have that. So what inspired me to become a writer? I never really liked writing. This probably sounds great to say. But I really started writing in journalism, which is what I went to school for, and ended up getting a job at the TV news stations, worked at a couple of those. I wanted to be a video editor, but they had a higher paying position open for a writer and producer, so I took that. This is where I'm getting with this whole thing, is I never really had a lot of confidence in my writing, but I had an anchor who told me that I was really talented at writing, so that always stuck with me. Fast forward a couple years and I get this corporate job, which was all well and good, but oh man, like I would just go to work every day, go to the gym, go to bed, and I'm just like, oh my god, like this is gonna be my life for the next 30 years. I gotta add something to this. And then that's when I thought of what that anchor said to me, that I was a talented writer. I was like, well, let me give this a shot. And so then I wrote a manuscript that got rejected by like 100 agents. But I kept going, and at one point in 2020, I published my first novella. So there's that boxing persistence I was talking about. So some of my current books, well, I had about, like they're gone, I have about 6 novellas and short stories out. But what I did was I combined them all into one collection called Books for the Broken. That's going to be out March 30th. And the big thing about that is that's going to be my first physical release, because I put all my novellas and short stories just on Kindle digitally, because I don't want people thinking they're going to order a book and it's going to be this 500-page epic and they get something that's like 80 pages. Like, I don't want anyone to feel ripped off or disappointed. So with Books for the Broken, that's going to just contain everything I've put out, but it's going to be in one book. It's a nice like 220 pages, so hopefully nobody feels slighted. I mean, they might when they read the stories, but I did the best I could. No, it's great. It's cool. It's like the culmination of a bunch of years of hard work all put into something that you can hold in your hand. So check out Books for the Broken. So, a Poe connection, old Eddie Poe. I do actually. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and where I grew up, the city wasn't terribly far from the Maryland border. So a day trip or a weekend trip down to Baltimore was fairly common. We'd go down there a lot, and I was too young to remember this, but one of our trips down to Baltimore, we actually went to Edgar Allan Poe's house down there. And I wish I was older than 1 or 2 because I would love to have that memory. But that is long gone. I don't remember anything from the 80s. And I'm sure I'm not alone, but for different reasons. All right, what do we got next? What are my future plans? Well, I just mentioned Books for the Broken comes out March 30th, so I want to get that out. I have a sequel to one of the stories in that, New Year's Killing Eve. I wrote New Year's Killing Eve 2 Afterglow. When did I write that? Last year, and then I got distracted, so I have to go back and edit that and try to get that published, hopefully by this holiday season. It sounds far away, but when you're trying to write and put something out by then, it comes up very quickly. So hopefully we get to see New Year's Killing Eve 2 this year. I guarantee it's good. I like it. I like what I did with it. Way to pat myself on the back. Jeez, what else you want to say? Best writer ever? Get out of here. All right, let's do the plugs. So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. The handle is author_Honeybrook for both of those. Check out the Midnight Terrace podcast. I co-host that with my buddy Kevin Roach. That's available anywhere you can stream. What is it? A podcast? Yes, Midnight Terror is available anywhere you can stream a podcast. And I also have a weekly column I write for tbmhorror.com called R. Jacobs Honeycut. So you can check that out as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Authorthon and have a wonderful day.
Hello, I'm Chris Sipner, and this is my video for Author Madness 2026, brought to you by the good people at 6 Degrees of Poe. And the first question they have for me is a brief biography. Well, I was raised by a feral cat somewhere in the backwoods of Southern Virginia, after which I decided to start painting. And that's really how I got my start with creativity. From an early age, I went to the Smithsonian and saw the big elephant to the giant blue whale at the Natural History Museum and decided to create my own museum under the shade of an old magnolia tree, just making dinosaurs out of sticks and pieces of rotten wood that I happened to find that I thought looked like a skull or looked like a vertebrae. And then I started drawing on any scrap of paper I could find. And among my earliest drawings were sequential works. I always wanted to tell a story. Even during show and tell in second grade, lots of kids would bring in something to show the class. They might bring in chicken eyeballs. Yeah, some guy brought in chicken eyeballs in a jar of alcohol to show the class. Well, I stopped bringing stuff to show, and I just decided to do the tell part of it. And for each week, I would act out a different story. Sometimes I'd act out a Godzilla movie or Wolfman or any of my favorite old school monster movies from the 20s up until the 50s. And when I finished up a math test early, on the back, I would start drawing stories. So even when I was just learning English in kindergarten, I was still drawing stories from one week to the next, from one test to the next. On the back of the pages would be more drawings. If I had to sit through church on a Sunday morning, I was drawing all over the bulletin and telling stories this way. So I never set out to become a creative or to become a visual artist or a curator or a writer. I just never stopped being one. I started from as early as I can remember, and I just kept doing it. So I didn't really have a choice. If I'd had a choice, I would have become a dentist or something instead, but much more lucrative and easier. But I didn't really have much of a choice. The decision was made from the time I hatched. So that wraps up one of the questions. Another question is, what are we currently working on? And I'm currently working on a book about the women in Poe's life. Actually, it's pretty much done, so you'll see that. And I just finished up the chapter for the Rutledge Companion, Edgar Allan Poe, about Poe in the comics, graphic novels, and the pulps. So there's lots of projects, visual art and writing in the works. My most recent book was Poe at Home, which I guess nobody read, but it's out there. And if you do happen upon it, which you can actually find on Amazon or at poemuseum.org in the gift shop section, it's about the places Poe lived. It's not just a tour of the places, it's a time machine taking you back to the experiences Poe had in these different homes, whether it's Baltimore or Philadelphia or the Bronx. And it takes you up until today. So each building is treated as an artifact. So we talk about the history of that building. Did you know that Poe's cottage in the Bronx would have been demolished if they hadn't picked it up and moved it across the street to Poe Park? Or how about the connection between Batman and that very house? Did you know that Batman was partially inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, and the creators met in Poe Park in the shadow of Poe's house? There's even ghost stories about the house. But there's other Poe sites, like his home in Philadelphia or his demolished homes here in Richmond. We try to take you through to places that you can visit, and we tell you about each of those different places, the history, the stories that they hold within them. So when you make the Poe pilgrimage, this book can serve as your guide and as your key to unlocking some of the last mysteries of Poe. Another one I have out there is called Haunting Poe, and it's about Poe's afterlife, his relationship with the spiritualist movement, but also Poe's sightings since his death. I mean, the guy's supposedly haunting 5 different cities, at least 3 different bars, not to mention houses, libraries, even the Fairmount Waterworks. The guy really gets around for a dead guy. And I try to compile all the different ghostly stories associated with Poe for that book, Haunting Poe. Another one out is the Poe Shrine, which breaks down the history of some of the Poe Museum's most important artifacts, like his socks or his walking stick, the lock of his hair, his childhood bed. And it was originally written in 2017, and recently we came out with a new edition of it, so revised it to keep up with the times. So if you already bought it back then, you now need to get the new edition of it, because you'll be the envy of all your friends. So aside from that, we're working at the Poe Museum. We just remodeled all the exhibits here and bringing out stuff that you've never seen before, stuff that's always been in storage until now. So it's the place to go for all things Poe. So I think that answered most of my questions for the video, but if you have other questions or you like more information, just check out chrissimpner.com. It's not phonetically spelled. There's like 3 consonants in a row that don't really quite work out, so just read the website here and go to that website to find out more about my visual art or my writing. And also you can find me on Instagram or X, formerly known as Twitter, or you can just look at my Amazon author page. But anyway, I look forward to any questions you might have or filling you in about all things Poe. Working on collaborative Poe projects. I mean, I've worked on Poe tarot cards, Poe ballets, Poe novels. So if you've got a Poe idea and you want some help or some guidance, let's communicate about that. So thanks for including me as part of Author Madness this year, and have a melancholy time.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Bolden, and I am here for Author Madness 2026, presented by the 6 Degrees of Poe, which I am half of for that podcast. So just to kind of get started and make things interesting, just to tell a little interesting fact about myself, I wanted to see all 50 states before I die. And so my husband helped me achieve that goal. And we did this in 2021 when we visited Alaska. And so I actually have a part of a manuscript written for that and hope to make that a book one day down the road. So writing. I have been writing stories since I was about 5 years old, just telling little stories. And by the time I was 7, I had my own cartoon. My dad helped me by the time I was in 4th grade make this little box that it had dowel rods, one in the top and the bottom, and I had drawn out the pictures for the story I had written, and my English teacher in the 4th grade allowed me to bring that in. I read the story and showed the story to the class, and then they had to finish the story, give it an ending, and then I got to choose it. And so that was probably one of the most exciting things in my schooling that I had happen. So from that point, I was writing mystery stories mainly and poetry. And so both of those are two of my loves that I will treasure for the rest of my life. And so from that, I have just continued to write and write and write up until now. And now I have my goal of finally publishing a book, and actually now more than one book. So I'm ecstatic about that because that was a dream come true. The process in how I write is I think of an idea and I kind of map it out in my head before I write anything down. And then once I do that, I do start making notes and kind of outline. And then I look at everything, think about how much do I know about the topic or things that need to go into the topic. And so then I research. I read books, I look at articles from credible sources, and then I start writing. And as soon as I start writing, I edit as I go. I also will do more research as needed. I want everything to be as authentic as possible, especially since with the Gothic Garden series, I'm writing in a time of the 1800s. And so things were different. I want to make sure that I'm being as historically accurate as possible with a little license. And then pretty much after that, I re-edit it for content. I re-edit it for grammar. And then I have other people look at it and edit for content and grammar as well. And then the book comes to life, and it is just amazing. It's such a great feeling. So the books I have out now, I have The Rose Bush that came out in May of 2025, which the idea came from two different things. I was entering a short story contest, and they give you like an event, a genre, and an item or something like that. And I just happened to get romance and two of the elements that are in the book. I don't want to give too much away. And so I also, when my husband and I were riding on a train in North Carolina, I happened to look out the window at this one point, and there was a rose bush out in this field. Nothing around it for several feet on all four sides. And I took a picture and said, that is going to become a story. So I wrote that note down really quick, or typed it up in my phone, I should say. And so that element went into the short story. And then I was talking to my wonderful author friend, Holly Knightley, and she convinced me to take that short story at least into a novella. and it happened. And so I can't say enough thank you to my husband and to Holly, because my husband takes me to all these wonderful places and it gives me all these great ideas for my stories. And for Holly for encouraging me to finally write that full book. So the other books I have, so after the Rosebush, the Gothic Garden series was born, and the Asphodels, which just came out here in February this year, is the second book. And I'm working on my third book in the Gothic Garden series right now, but I don't want to give too much away. But it is a very unique flower, so I'll be anxious to see how my readers enjoy this story. I also have put together a poetry collection called Eclectic Expressions, and it encompasses poems I have written for many, many years. I also added pictures to enhance the reading enjoyment for each poem. And I'm really proud of this poetry collection because I never thought I would probably publish a poetry collection. And so I now want to do more. Also, we have the Flavored Raven, The Favored Raven is the podcast newsletter. So the Flavored Raven, recipes based on the 6 Degrees of Edgar Allan Poe, is a recipe book myself, my husband, and Jeannie, my podcast partner, put together, and it came out in December of last year. And it is 7 chapters of Poe's recipes based on Poe's works and life. The 7th chapter is The Mask of the Red Death Feast, and it is a chapter I'm so proud of. But the book itself was a 5-year-long labor of love, and we are so proud of the book because it is something that you can take home and actually read the directions and make the recipes and actually enjoy them. They should look just like the pictures, and they are very tasty. So I hope everyone enjoys the recipe book. And future plans, again, I'm working on the 3rd book for the Gothic Garden series, and I have probably about 3 or 4 other ideas for the books after that. I've got all kinds of things in my head. I have always had a very vivid imagination, and I think that's why my love of writing developed at such a young age. And also from books I read as a child and into my teenage years, everything just put all together, including my dad really pushed me to write. I think he saw something in me that he wanted me to flourish, and I can't thank him enough. And I wish he was here to see that book published, that first book and the subsequent others. Well, I think I have taken all the time I need to talk a little bit about myself and the books I write. And so for now, I am Poe out.